we've seen King David become greater and greater. The Lord helps David wherever he goes. God promised to make David a great name and to give him rest from all his enemies. And God has kept his promises. We're about to see that David keeps his promises as well. I'm in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1, reading from the New American Standard Version. Then David said, "Is there yet anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" We remember this bond between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. In 1 Samuel 18, Jonathan and David made a covenant, and Jonathan stripped off his robe with his armor and sword and bow and gave it to David. In 1 Samuel 20, Jonathan helped David escape from his father, the king. And Jonathan said this to David in verse 20:15, "You shall not cut off your loving kindness from my house forever, not even when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." And in 1 Samuel 20:42, Jonathan said to David, "Go in safety, inasmuch as we have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord will be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever." David is now a powerful king. God has indeed cut off all his enemies. And David remembers his promise to Jonathan. Continuing verse 2, "Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David. And the king said to him, 'Are you Ziba?' And he said, 'I am your servant.' The king said, 'Is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?' And Ziba said to the king, 'There is still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet.' So the king said to him, 'Where is he?' And Ziba said to the king, 'Behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lodebar.'" So it seems in the way David posed the question, "Is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul?" that maybe he thinks there is no one left. And we can understand why, because Mephibosheth is away on someone else's property. I love that David makes it clear that this is from God. He wants to show the kindness of God. And interesting that this is how Jonathan's son is identified, crippled in both feet. As if Ziba is saying, you need to take note of that. Maybe Ziba is thinking David might want to show kindness to someone else who doesn't have this stigma. But David's response is, where is he? We learn that Jonathan's son is staying in the home of Machir, the son of Amiel, who is apparently a man of wealth. He's also mentioned in 2 Samuel 17:27. Continuing verse 5, "Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodebar. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, 'Mephibosheth,' and he said, 'Here is your servant.' David said to him, 'Do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly.' Again he prostrated himself and said, 'What is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me?' So Mephibosheth is called to the king's palace, and you can imagine he might have some trepidation. He's from the house of Saul. He knows at one time there was war between David's house and Saul's house. And even apart from that, just being summoned by this powerful ruler, you would wonder, what is this about? So he falls on his face and prostrates himself and calls himself David's servant. But David puts him at ease right away, saying, "Do not fear. And I will show you kindness, and not just a one-time gift or some such thing. I will restore to you your grandfather, the king's land, and you will eat at my table regularly." Understandably, Mephibosheth is shocked. He prostrates himself again and says, "What is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me?" David used those same words when he encountered Saul at the cave when he was on the run. David said to Saul, "Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog, a single flea?" He was saying, "Why are you pursuing me? I'm nothing." Mephibosheth surely had no idea that at one time this powerful king David had used those same words to describe himself. Continuing verse 9, "Then the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, 'All that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring in the produce so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly.' Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, 'According to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do.' So Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's sons." This is extraordinary what David is doing for Mephibosheth. All of Saul's estate will be his, as well as a multitude of servants, and he'll eat at the king's table regularly. Just as God blessed and elevated David, David is blessing and elevating Mephibosheth. I can't help but wonder who was occupying Saul's land prior to this. Was it Ziba and his sons? We're not told, but whoever had been enjoying the use of that land, the king has now transferred it to Mephibosheth's hands. And Ziba, of course, does not protest. He says he will do what the king commands. Continuing verse 12, "Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in the house of Ziba were servants to Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate at the king's table regularly. Now he was lame in both feet." We get that emphasis again that Mephibosheth was lame in both feet, and I think because it goes to the kindness that David showed him. And it was a great kindness, an extension of the bond that David shared with Jonathan. David said he wanted to show the kindness of God, and we hear that word kindness so often we may forget that it is a fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22 and 23, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." If it's a fruit of the Spirit, it's behavior that is evident in the life of someone who is led by the Spirit of God. Kindness means having a tender concern for others. It's exactly what we see in this chapter, and it's what we should prayerfully see in our own lives as we cling to God. We talk a lot about what it looks like to cling to God in terms of looking to God and trusting God. Clinging to God should also impact those around us by the grace and kindness we extend to them. Jesus said this in John 13:35, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And certainly kindness goes hand in hand with love. As we cling to God, let's ask God whom we can show an intentional kindness. And let's stay aware of opportunities to show the kindness of God.